One of the most important things for Christian men is for them to have friends. And one of the most dangerous things for a Christian man is for him to live an isolated life. My guest today is David Dusek, and we're going to discuss the issues of friendship, isolation, accountability, and how our wives fit into this discussion. David Dusek's mission is to encourage and equip men to live their lives for Christ. He utilizes his life experiences, including his upbringing in a non-Christian home, coming to Christ as an adult, and an extensive business background to reach men in a way that they can understand. David's vision is to engage all men where they are the other 6 days of the week, not just in church. David is the founder of Rough Cut Ministries, which is primarily a live interactive men's experience using a strategic combination of action movie sequences, real-world current events, biblical truth, and a fire team-sized discussion, those times with a single laser-focused objective: to get men talking about what's really going on in their lives. David travels around the country and the world using the Rough Cut Men movie experience to get men to be transparent with one another and with Jesus. So let's get started. Well, hey, David, thanks for being here. I'm looking forward to talking with you today.
I'm excited to be here, man. Let's get after it.
Yeah, we'll get right in. So we're going to talk about a topic that's incredibly important for men, for Christian men, and that's this idea of isolation.
Yeah.
And where I'd like to start actually is that there's a line in your book, Rough Cut Men, and I want to quote it here. It says, "I believe one of Satan's key missions is to isolate men from other men." That's just a great big picture place to start. So how is isolation of men? How is that one of Satan's key missions?
I think he comes at us from multiple angles, and I've actually been living part of it in the last week, where you get discouraged, you get defeated, you look around and there's absolutely nothing going right. And one of the immediate de facto responses, or like our default, is to push away from everybody and everything. Say, I got to get out of here. I need to be by myself. And while sometimes that's therapeutic, because Jesus obviously spent time in the garden by himself and a number of other places, at the end of the day, isolation is the linchpin that leads to everything else. I work a lot with Christ-centered drug recovery. I work a lot with a number of different groups of people who have really fallen into some habit that is a direct result of isolation. So the enemy has figured out, if I can get this guy by himself, I can get him doing things that he shouldn't be doing. Secondly, I can get him to buy the lie. Or I don't know if you've ever had one of those days where you look in the mirror and you realize, I'm facing my own worst enemy. Whoa. That's how the enemy works. He wants us alone because that's when he does his best lying. And whatever the end game is for him, it's to take us out of the family, out of the marriage, and wreck our generational legacy. And it typically occurs through isolation. That's where it all starts.
Yep.
Every habit, every addiction, quite honestly, every self-harm, every suicide always stems from being alone and not having any brotherhood.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of those lies as well that I'd love to get your thoughts on, one of those lies as well is nobody will understand. I'm the only one going through this.
Yep.
And we build that up in our head. I'm the only guy. Like nobody else will get this. Nobody else is going to, so what do you think about that? How does that work inside, the mind of a guy?
Well, I think we all do it. And the unfortunate part of that is there's nothing new under the sun, the words of Solomon. And Satan's got a bag of tricks that ain't that big. He's been using the same thing since the Garden of Eden. Get them to question God, get them to distance themselves, get them to realize the pattern of their sin and that there's no hope. Done. And so he does the same thing with us. And the double-edged sword on that is most of us have hundreds of acquaintances and no friends. So we never get into an authentic, transparent, real conversation with guys where we say, look, this sucks. I'm in the middle of this thing and I can't get out. And there's nothing. I think it was C.S. Lewis that said the greatest friendships start with the statement, "Oh, you too." And I think if we had more open, transparent conversations with each other, we would realize that, hey, man, the guy to my right is dealing with the same thing. The guy to my left has God's already gotten him through it. And when we have people that can guide us through a struggle that we are in where we feel completely alone, then it ups our chance of survival by a factor of a million, you know? So I think as long as we remain quiet and we do our once a month burnt pancake men's breakfast at the
Yeah.
church,
Yeah.
then we're not going to forge any real relationship.
Yeah.
That's not how you develop a battle hardened brotherhood,
Yeah.
is a once a month meeting. It just doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
And so guys will continue to think I'm it. I'm the only one who's ever been through fill in the blank. But I promise you, whoever's listening, there is a 100% certainty that you are not the only one and you're not the first guy to go through it, nor will you be the last.
Yep. Absolutely. Totally. Totally. And it can be such an effective lie that you're the only one, because then it prevents you even in a way from seeking, because you've already convinced yourself no one else understands, no one else is going through this, so I'm not even going to take the step of
Right.
trying to find out if anybody else might have something like this. It just keeps me locked in my shell.
It absolutely does. And on top of that, as I mentioned before, we have lots of name tags we can read at the church, but we don't have anybody that we've actually shared time in a Humvee with, for example, where the only thing that matters when you're in the Humvee is you and the three guys you're with, and that's it.
Yeah.
We don't have that. And I've watched this over the last 20 years and created kind of a formula almost where time develops trust. If I don't spend time with you, there'll be no trust. If there's no trust, there'll never be a relationship. If there's no relationship, we're going to stay an inch deep and a mile wide all day. I'm going to talk about my dog. I'm going to talk about my job. I'm going to talk about
Right.
whatever it is to keep you at arm's length. So it's no wonder we feel like we're the only one. We've never let anybody in,
Yeah.
because we don't trust anybody enough. And let's face it, I mean, we've all been burned by somebody in the past, whether it's pre-salvation or worse yet by we got a church wound. So we're kind of reaping the results of our own stupidity in a lot of cases. Um, but it's not one of those things where you can just sit guys down around sausages on a Saturday and say, all right, we're going to go from doing this 8 week superficial video led Bible study to let's talk about what's really going on in our lives. No one is
Right.
going to put their hand up because
Right.
they don't trust the guy to the
Right.
right and to the left yet.
Right.
And that
Right.
only comes with time. And when you can start a conversation with a guy by saying, I've never told anybody this before, but fill in the blank, then you've arrived.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of work. It's just like a marriage almost. It takes a lot of pay out the line. And if you get burned, maybe that's the wrong person to be confiding in.
Yeah.
But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and not hang out with other people. I mean, when we were young, you read my book. I talk about the TV show Hawaii Five-O, which was a big deal when we were kids. Um, None of us at 5 years old, 6 years old, had ever seen Hawaii Five-O. It was a grown-up show. It was on at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
But we all wanted to play Hawaii Five-O in the playground. And in kindergarten, there were no qualifications. No one came up and said, hey, you can't play with us because you don't have the right job, or you're the wrong denomination, or you're the wrong socioeconomic level, or you don't drive the right car, or you don't have a motorcycle, so you can't participate. And we got that way as we've grown older, and we've even made ministry to men a wildly unfriendly place to be sometimes, which is no wonder we're going through life by ourselves.
Yeah.
No
What's a
trust.
way of that when you say that, ministry can be unfriendly to men? Dig into that a bit. What do you mean by that?
I don't necessarily know if it's unfriendly as much as it is unsafe. Um, because there's probably someone listening, and I know I'm personally one who's dealt with this before, where you finally decide that you're going to embark at some level of transparency with a group of people, and then 2 Sundays later, you end up walking into church and everybody's looking at you,
Yeah.
because you became the topic of not prayer, but gossip
Mm-hmm.
masquerading as prayer.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what happens a lot is, I think church church wounding is worse than real world wounding in a lot of cases. When didn't get saved until I was in my 30s, and the best conversations I had were with guys in bars because we were all train wrecks. We all admitted we were train wrecks, and we were all real with each other.
Yeah.
And then fast forward into the church world, and you just don't have the same bar stool kind of a mentality where you're afraid of rebuke, you're afraid of reproach, you're afraid of judgment or being blackballed from the group. So we have to put on this guise that everything is perfect,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
while everything underneath us is eroding. It's all superficial, you
Yeah.
know. And I think that results in a lot of wounding from guys. They don't feel that they have any safe place to go talk to anybody.
Yeah. And that point of walking back into church and everybody's looking at me, to share just a bit about one of the things I do is I lead men's events here in the mountains in Colorado,
Hmm.
and we do small events, 20 or so guys. So they're small events, but we bring guys in from all over the country who don't know each other.
Yeah,
And I have found over the years of doing that, there's a great benefit to that, because the odds of me living here in Colorado bumping into, Tom who lives in New Jersey at Walmart
right.
is zero. And
Yeah,
so there's almost a built into the equation. We don't know each other beforehand. We're not going to run into each other afterwards.
right,
And it helps to create that, because you're right. If I'm not feeling safe enough to have that conversation, I'm not going to talk about things, because I've been burned before
right.
in the church, been burned outside of the church. And all that ends up doing is leading me to the superficial conversations and to something else that you talk about in your book. All I'm going to do is I'm fine.
Yep,
I'm
I'm
just going to go
good.
with the I'm fine thing. So what's behind that to you when you hear somebody say the I'm fine, what sort of thing, especially because you've written about it, kind of what sort of
That,
things pop into your mind when you hear a guy say, yeah, I'm fine?
truthfully,
Yeah.
that they're blowing smoke up my butt. I mean, I'm just being real. It's like none of us are fine. And I've got 5 kids. Now I've got grandkids. There's a whole litany of things that went on in my life. So if you see me and I tell you that I'm fine, that is just me I'm giving you the stiff arm. Uh, because I don't know you, I don't like you, and I don't particularly trust you yet. Excuse me. One of the things that I'm finding now, I've done thousands of events all over the US and Australia and New Zealand, and I have become people's go-to guy, because I'm kind of like what you're saying. The odds of me running into a dude from Uniontown, Pennsylvania at a Walmart in Sarasota, Florida, where I live, is about zip, unless they're snowbirds and they're down for a few
Yeah.
months out of the year.
Yeah.
So I've become the one trusted agent in their life who profess to know me really well because I've been wildly transparent for 8 hours on a platform. And it's really scary, that everybody is bombarding me with emails and text messages when the whole goal was to develop relationship amongst the brotherhood where they are.
Yeah.
Um, but still, there's still at that point, there's still pushback. The guys don't, they've been burned to the point of analysis paralysis. Like, I don't want to let this guy in. Um, I think what we I don't even know how to get around it in a lot of cases. I don't know how to break through that other than to encourage men to take another shot at hanging out together. Guys that are prior service know exactly what the brotherhood is like. And the one thing you ask any prior service, especially combat veteran, um, what they miss the most, they don't miss the food or the place clearly, or the job. They miss the guys that they were with.
Yeah.
And it would be great to be able to get to that mindset, um, because it's really not who we're with. It's not what we're doing. It's who we're with, which I think is why you're successful in what you do in Colorado. Is when guys are put to task, they tend to develop teams,
Yeah.
and that's the one thing that I think we undervalue in the world of men's ministry in the church. Also, not putting them to work, putting them on, car cleanup duty or, paint the widow's house kind of stuff, although those projects help. It's putting men to task. The greatest ministries thrive when guys are in a motorcycle gang together, or they're fishing together, or playing golf, or
Doing.
whatever it is.
Yeah,
Whatever, yeah, they're
doing.
doing
Yeah.
something. Because what will ultimately happen is the first time you ever go out and play golf with someone and you're stuck in a golf cart, you may stay an inch deep and a mile wide and be fine the first time. Um, but when you're stuck with me for 4.5 hours, we are going to talk. We're talking deep. We're going to get
Yeah.
there eventually.
Yeah.
Um, and you'll learn that you can trust me and vice versa. And then that's when God does his best work. And that's when the enemy's isolation tactic is cut off at the knees. Until we bond as brothers, we're going to see the enemy doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. And we can see in scripture multiple examples. It's not like a one-off single verse that we're taking out of context. We can see multiple examples of the power of having that friend, having somebody
Oh
who
yeah,
has your back, having somebody to support you, somebody to call you out when you're doing the wrong thing. That probably the most famous example, or one that's used the most, is David, Bathsheba, Nathan, that kind of
yeah,
connection between them. Nathan's not around when David and Bathsheba are, when that's happening. Nathan shows up, rebukes his friend,
yep,
and so we've got to have those people. It's not an option. One of the things that I admit frustrates me is when I'm talking with guys and having these conversations, I don't know how to make it more clear that this isn't an option. You have to have this in
right,
your life. Have you ever had that struggle where you're talking with guys and you just can't quite get through? I'm not telling you a nice to have, that you have to have
yeah,
this in your life.
yeah. There's always one guy, uh, and I mean, I've had guys at events that absolutely refuse to talk. They're in a designated breakout session, and they say, I got invited here by somebody else, and I don't know any of you guys, and I'm not talking. And usually they're the ones that crack like an egg by the end of the time together. And I that's happened to me in Houston a couple of years ago, where I was trying to find the host because I had to get in my rental car and get to the airport to get home, and I couldn't find him. And it turned out he was with the most obstinate guy out of the 200 and some odd guys at this retreat. Um, God's ultimate design from the Garden of Eden is 2 by 2.
Right.
Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2. I love Jonathan and his armor bearer, who said, "Do it, whatever you have in mind, do it. I'm with you, heart and soul. I got your back, no
Yep.
matter what."
Yep.
And when you cast the vision that way, sometimes the Holy Spirit just has to take the seed you planted and do some watering and some tilling. Or it might even, we're kind of big, dumb, stupid animals, and it takes a crisis for God to really get a hold of us. Um, where guys will finally realize the value of I'm going into this battle alone and I'm going to lose.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't fight by myself. And then all that talking and all that praying and all that vision casting, maybe 5, 10, 15 years later, a guy will finally have that aha moment spiritually and get it that he needs a brother
Yeah.
in his life. But there's always somebody.
Yeah.
I was very resistant to it for a long time, because accountability is a frightening word. You
Yep.
know, do I really want someone scrolling through my internet history? I mean, do I really want a guy looking at where my finances are going? Do I really want a guy calling me out when I make that comment on social media because I'm adamant about it, even though it's, number one, horribly stupid to put there, and secondly, a really bad representation of Jesus. Um, Accountability, brotherhood, support, encouragement, all of them are designed to make sure that our words and our actions line up with who we say we are in Jesus. And when we deviate from that, we've given another man permission, just like a weapons check or a buddy check before you go downrange, or a spacewalk, making sure you got your oxygen. I mean, my dad was a Navy frogman. He always dove in pairs, and you gave the other guy permission to make sure that your bottles worked correctly, that you had all the gear that you needed so that you didn't die. And once we get to that point in the church world, and guys understand, hey, we have an enemy that wants to steal, kill, and destroy, period. In order to survive, steal, kill, and destroy, you need to do a buddy check. You got to have somebody making sure you've got your armor with you, making sure you've got enough magazines for your spiritual weapon. All of that is why it's so valuable. But until a guy really gets stared down and in contact with the enemy of our souls,
Yeah.
um, a lot of guys are the great pretender and will continue to be that.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but man, if you only knew, guys, how powerful it is to have a brother in your life,
Yeah.
like a
So so
legit
it,
brother.
so somebody's I know for a fact somebody's listening right now and they're saying, okay, that sounds cool. How do I find that guy? What do I do? And I know I've had this conversation with men before, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Somebody's listening and they don't have that guy. They do acknowledge they need it.
Yeah,
They do know that they want it. But what do they do? Because, like you said, we're not really into the vulnerability, accountability thing. We're not going to go into church and say, hello, I'm struggling. Who will be my pal?
right. Yeah.
So how do we go about that?
I joke that it's a lot like a dating relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You're plugged into a small group with seven other guys, and first thing you do is you say, "Hey, I really resonate with this dude. Let's go get coffee. Let's go shooting. Let's go do whatever it is we like to do, but let's take somebody with us." And then you just kind of see how things go. You have conversations, and just like any other circumstances, there are some people you'll resonate with, and there are some people that you won't. Um, some people will violate your trust, some people won't. So you have to start somewhere, and that just requires some intentionality. You say, okay, I'm going to give this dude a chance. We're going to go. I mean, he likes to shoot. I like to shoot. Let's go shooting, and see how that conversation goes. The biggest mistake we can make, especially if we're the disciple side of a new accountability relationship where we're just all gung ho on this deal, is to fast track a guy to a place that's uncomfortable. Um, all accountability is uncomfortable, but without the trust piece, then it's really just a superior subordinate, um, demoralizing festival that guys just want to get out of, and suddenly they won't go shooting with you anymore. So we have to be real sensitive as we're forging these relationships.
Yeah.
Um, and I truly believe, most importantly of all, that transparency in and of itself breeds transparency. So if you want somebody that you're hanging out with to be real, you've got to be real. And I'll be real. I've got a group of guys that I meet on Zoom, because we're all itinerant speakers. And several of them are pretty well known, but we get on this call every week. Um, and yesterday I just had enough. I didn't want somebody to ask me, what do you think God's teaching you in the middle of all this? And I even told them, I said, someone's going to come back with what do you think God's trying to teach you in the middle of this? And right now, I don't care. Right now, I'm busted. I'm broken. I'm done. And the honest truth is, I did not even get through the small group without losing it. Couldn't get the words out. I was that defeated. And this was just like literally 24 hours ago. Um, what it did to the rest of the group, who are all, one guy's a former NFL quarterback. They're all big and bad. It took us to a level just by me being broken completely. I'm much better today, by the way. Um, Broken completely yesterday with three other guys I've been hanging out with for 3, 4 years. I mean, I see them at events, but we do our meetings once a week virtually because we're all over the map. It took us to a whole other level. And one of the guys said, I don't think the question is, what is God trying to teach you? I think, what is God trying to teach all of us? Um, that transparency 24 hours ago changed the face of our group. So if your desire to have a really cool relationship with a guy that's deep, um, you got to open your trench coat and say, hey, man, look at my junk. This is what I'm in the middle of right now, because you'd be surprised how disarming and how it levels a playing field with another guy it can be when you're just wide open, real. And yes, it's a risk, but at the same time, the return far outweighs the risk.
Yeah. I agree. Couldn't agree with you more. It really does. Going through life alone, that's when we make our worst decisions.
Oh
and
yeah.
and yeah, having those brothers with us. What about a guy who would say, I have my wife. She knows everything about me. We talk about everything. She is my friend. I don't really need a guy to step in and play that part because I have her.
I tried that. I tried that with my wife. When we were, newly married, she had been walking with the Lord significantly longer than me. And one of the things that she said is she goes, you need a group of guys. And which is why I'm 20 years into this ministry and haven't, I want to quit about every Tuesday. But she just won't let me because she knows the inherent value of men locking shields with other men. So she was the number one advocate of you need a small group of guys. And I said, well, why? I mean, you've been walking with the Lord since you met him at the Billy Graham revival when you were like 7. You've forgotten more scripture than I'll ever know. You're good. But there are times when, while she's more than qualified, she knows she's the wrong person for the job. Um, all the guys that we talk about in the Old Testament had wives. Um, but David had Jonathan. Jonathan had an armor bearer. Even into the New Testament, Paul had Barnabas to start with, and then
Mhm.
Silas. And uh, unless I use a military term, unless you spill the same blood in the same mud, um, you're coming at things. One's on an AM frequency, one's on an FM. Young people, you'll just have to Google that. But
Yeah.
um, coming at two different frequencies where even though you're sharing the same radio tower, so to speak, there are certain times when a guy is just a better choice. So if you are um, dealing with the plague of 80% of the men in the church, you're wildly addicted to internet pornography. I'm not 100% sure that the response that you get from your wife is going to be the one that you want. Um, maybe, but more often than not, just putting yourself out there with another guy. And of course, there's all kinds of, covenant eyes. There's a
Sure.
litany of different protections that you can, built-in accountability where you can task somebody to be your accountability partner. And anytime you deviate from the straight and narrow online, you get a phone call.
Yeah.
Um, much better for a man uh, to have a man. Um, you don't want to jeopardize mama's security, either in the home front or maritally or relationally, or her security as she feels um, less than she used to, or the things that our wives all say and do um, would be a terrible fit for a lust problem. Uh, Other cases, maybe, but I make financial decisions, obviously involving my wife, but before they even really become a thing, I bounce them off of my accountability partner. I remember once when we were new to ministry, writing checks, young people, another thing you're going to have to Google. I'm writing checks and I'm paying the mortgage, and I out loud was just cathartic, just thinking out loud. I said, "Man, I don't know how we're going to pay the mortgage next month," and she was within earshot, and that did not go over well because now I'm jeopardizing mama's nest, and
Yeah.
all they want is security. And that's when my accountability partner said, the next time that happens, that's what I'm for. Come to me and say, I'm struggling with this. I don't know how we're going to get through it. And we'll pray together. And um, it's just, there's just something valuable about another guy that, I mean, I love my wife to death.
Yeah.
She'd be a great accountability partner, but even she knows she's not the right one.
Yeah. And I would add on to that, when we look to our wives for that, we are giving them another, this is the word that's coming to mind. It has a slightly negative connotation that I don't mean, but we're giving them another burden. We're
Hmm.
giving them another thing to deal with. We're giving them
Right.
another thing. And not in the context of we're partners doing life together, but rather now she has yet another task to take on.
Yeah.
And it's just healthier, in my opinion, for the relationship if you're not adding that burden.
Especially if you're still raising young kids at home. I mean, there was a season we had 5 teenagers. I mean, now they're 31, 30, 29, 28, and 26, but there was a time when they were all teenagers. And just trying to get everybody to every event, sport, everything else. The last thing we need to do is throw something really heavy duty on an already overextended person.
Yeah.
And granted, we're overextended also. And that's one of the reasons, another one of the myriad of reasons why it's so important to have another guy in our life is we can monkey transfer some of the junk we have in our backpack off to a buddy and say, I can't deal with this right now. I don't know. Pray on this for me because I'm not seeing it clearly. I'm emotionally compromised in the midst of whatever the battle is. There are guys I know that listen to lots of podcasts, and I'm one of them that has struggled with a prodigal child, and there's one of those things where you can really get into mental gymnastics with prodigal kids, wondering, what did I do wrong? Why am I such a horrible father? Why do four of them text me back, but one doesn't? And you get on the hamster wheel of self-deprecation. And sometimes it's just healthy to say, here you go, buddy. I'm struggling with this right now. You can't give that one to your wife because she's also in the mix of that particular, she's also equally emotionally compromised with that particular kid. So yet again, another positive aspect of having a guy.
Yeah.
When you're in the throes of being emotionally compromised, you don't make good decisions.
Right.
You may be logical, you may be brilliant, but in the midst, when in the fog of war, you'll shoot anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another one of those reasons, I need somebody who can see the circumstances clearly, who's not emotionally invested and will give me a rational angle of attack with the best possible outcome.
Yeah. One of the lines connected to that I like to share with my guys is, it's very hard, if not impossible, to fix a problem during the problem. You need to get through that moment. Then in hindsight, you do your analysis and you look back at, what did I do wrong? What did I say or whatever? But yeah, you're totally right on that. I want to go back to something you said earlier. Just wrote it down real briefly. You were talking about you might have 100 acquaintances and, all an inch deep. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how social media has amplified this, because now I can go online and say, hey, I've got 5,000 friends, but none of them know me. So how have you seen social media impacting this issue? Because I could be fully surrounded by people, but completely isolated.
I think it's been a tremendous detriment. I'm Gen X, so I'm old school. I'm, one phone in the kitchen on a long cord kind of a guy with one phone number for half the street. So we've gotten to a point now where their interpersonal face-to-face communication is getting more and more rare. 2020 didn't help. I mean, we drove an entire country into isolation on purpose. And then we wondered why there was such a visibly awful outcome. Churches still have yet to recover from some of that isolation stuff that we put everybody through. There's been any number of Barna studies that have shown that there's a significant number of people that were plugged into the body, a physical body at a church, that have now relegated themselves to online only because they decided, I'm going to go to this church in Oklahoma City, even though I live in Florida. And so now we're not even gathering in the church building together. Remote work where no one is, my daughter has a hybrid job where she goes to the office in Chicago half the time and works from home half the time. So we just continue to set up the dominoes of isolation, which again, anytime you hear the word isolation, I think, the enemy is behind it. We may make the ultimate decision to distance ourselves from other people, but what propagated that was, the enemy of our souls saying, I'm going to get these people by themselves. Because if I can get them by themselves, they'll do all kinds of stupid stuff. I've done it. I've lived it. I've heard about it. There's nothing that in my years in ministry now, there's literally nothing I have not heard. And I've heard some crazy stuff, and every bit of it comes from being isolated. Now, social media is even worse because what we're seeing is everybody's highlight reel. So not only do we not know how they really are, we're seeing their absolute best moments. sometimes edited.
Oh yeah.
I saw a meme once where a guy was leaning against his car with this beautiful view, and it was like, I think he was in the Amalfi Coast of Italy, looking out over the Mediterranean Sea. But when the camera panned back, the car was wrecked. He crashed it into a rock wall. There were police there, and but he took the picture and made it look like, just living the dream.
Yep.
And I think that's it. It's now we are comparing our lives to what we see on social media, and the death of contentment comes by the hand of comparison. So we start looking around and we're no longer content with our lives, which means that we don't want to interact with anybody because they all have it better than us. And it's just a domino effect.
Yeah.
So it's magnified a lot of the issues that we used to have. You used to have to see your neighbor drive down the street in that new Mercedes, and you had to keep up with the Joneses. Google it, young people. But the neighbor was named Jones and they bought the new car, and you looked at it, or you looked at their new house and the new furniture. Now everybody is putting all that stuff up on social media. Um, so it just makes us want to be less involved with people. And they're not
Yeah.
even our friends in the first place. There's not of all my friends on social media, there might be four, and I need six to carry my casket that
Right.
I can think
Right.
of, that I actually have a relationship with. The rest of them know me, and they'll come up to me in an event and say, "Hey, will you sign the book that I ordered off Amazon? I know everything about you." It's like, I, you're either brother or dude because I don't know your name. Uh, that's the way most of us are going through life
Yeah.
now. We're
Yeah.
flexing on social media because, God, aren't the kudos of man the most amazing thing in the world? Let me
Hmm.
see how many likes I can get with this particular picture. Uh,
Yeah.
and now we get what we get.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of another meme where they're at somebody's funeral and there's only three or four people there, and one person leans to the other and said, "He has 5,000 friends. I thought more people would be here." You know, but they're
Yep.
not actually. We don't really. So I'd love to switch to something if you're willing, talking about transparency. So you share a very powerful story in your book about your son and
Yeah.
some of what he went through
Yeah.
and the importance of your friend David at
Yep.
that time.
Yep.
If you're willing, can you share a bit about that story and just what you learned as it relates to this conversation about isolation and having that person there for you?
Well, there's a lot to that story. It was a number of years ago now. He's now, some will be almost 15 years ago, right? So it would have been 2009. So yeah, 15 years ago. So half of his life ago. He's going to be 30 this year. But his mom passed away of cancer, and I'm divorced, remarried. That's how I met the Lord. That's a whole other backstory. Um, their mom moved back to Florida from Seattle after our divorce so I could be near the kids, was diagnosed with cancer um, in 2007, and it was stage 4, and she was only 37 at the time. Colon cancer, liver, lymph nodes, it went everywhere. And we had a meeting with my kids that night at her apartment um, to let them know that mom had cancer, and it was going to be a fight, but they wanted to see, I wanted them to see a unified front. We're on the same page. I'll drive your mom if I have to, even though she's my ex. I'll drive your mom anywhere she needs to go. We're in this for the long haul.
Yeah.
Um, then I left, and there was another meeting that I wasn't involved in where my ex told my children she was moving from Florida back to Seattle to undergo treatment and wanted my kids to go with. My daughter mutinied and had just started high school, so she was going to move in with us here in Florida. My son decided he was going to go to Seattle and called me on the phone, and that was when I lost my mind. I threw my phone across the living room, and it blew into a million pieces. Um, Grabbed my marital settlement agreement, my divorce papers, because it very specifically said that she couldn't take my kids out of the state. And I headed off to my friend David's house um, to get my wingman so we could go to court the next day and fight her. But when I got there, I ended up breaking down like a 5-year-old little boy who skinned his knee in the driveway. I mean, I just couldn't get the words out. This is 11 o'clock at night. I'm snot flying and tears going everywhere. And he just brought me into the house and sat me down and threw a box of Kleenex and a bottle of water at me and sat across the other side of the room, didn't say a word for over an hour. I mean, he just kind of sat there. And um, I learned a lot from that. It reminds me a lot of Job. And I mentioned
Mm.
Job, I think, in my book, where I talk about Job's three friends who all had a reason. I call them three typical church guys because they all had a reason why Job, the most righteous man in the world, had lost everything: his kids, his fortune, his health. I mean, he had boils everywhere. Even his wife, Mrs. Job, said, "You just need to curse God and die." And his three friends came up and they all had a reason why he was suffering. And it goes on for like 38 chapters. But in Job 2, the Bible says when they heard about their friend's struggle, they headed off to see him. And it could have been a month to get to him. When they saw him, they fell to the ground. They tore their robes. They threw dust on their head, which is the ultimate Old Testament symbol of repentance. So they're sitting in sackcloth and ashes, repenting for their friend. And the Bible says when they got to him, they sat down in the dirt with him for 7 days and 7 nights and didn't say a word. So they sat with their friend for a week. And I don't know where anybody listening is in terms of their involvement in quote unquote ministry to men or men's ministry, whatever your vernacular is. Um, but we've lost that ability to just sit. I think we miss the fact that the ministry of presence is one of the most important things we can do for someone else. When someone calls and they've had to bury their spouse, you don't have to know what it's like to lose your wife to sit with a man who just did. You don't have to know what it's like to file bankruptcy, uh, to sit with a man who just did. You don't have to know what it's like to be struggling uh, in the midst of a divorce, to sit with a man who's going through one. I mean, I
Yeah.
joke that if you can fog a mirror, you're the right man for the job. If I put a mirror under your nose and steam comes out, you are eminently qualified to sit with that man. So I learned that piece of it. Um, I also learned from David that after about an hour, he spoke up and he brought up Abraham from Galatians 3, and he asked me what Abraham's greatest test was. And I said, well, he had to put his son Isaac up on a pile of sticks and sacrifice him to God. And the whole Sunday school thing, the ram came out of the bushes and God said, stop. And I was telling him the whole story as if he hadn't heard it before. And in the middle of my diatribe, he pointed at me and said, you have to let your son move to Seattle. Because if you don't let him go and she dies and he's not there, you're going to lose him forever. He's never going to forgive you. Um, and he was right. I let him go. And 18 months to the day later, I went to Seattle to pick him up and fly him home. And the first Sunday he was home, uh, he contemplated suicide. We were at church and he wasn't with us. And um, he was Baker acted, and the police took him for 3 days and they took his belt and his shoelaces and all that. And I remember watching that police car um, leave with my son in the back for protective reasons, not because he was under arrest. And I came back in the house, collapsed into the same leather chair I'd thrown my phone out of about 18 months earlier. Um, and my wife came out of our bedroom and said two words to me. She said, call David. So even though she could have said any number of things that would have gotten me through that, I also learned that um, even my wife knows who my wingman is. Uh, I don't advocate her calling him and saying, "Hey, David's off the rails."
Sure.
We don't roll that way. We don't cross the gender line, so to speak, in certain circumstances. But she knows, and there's no greater security, I think, in our wives' lives than knowing that we have an Aaron on one arm and a her on the other arm, just like Moses did to hold him up when we can't hold him up ourselves anymore. And that's three quick lessons I learned in the
Yeah.
midst of one of the worst circumstances of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I do appreciate you sharing that, because it's a real world example of this. Because we can talk in theory, you
Mm,
want to have a guy, the importance of having a guy. We can talk about that, but being able to bring a practical real world example of that is very
mm.
helpful to men as they're listening. As we get closer towards wrapping up, um, what what are some questions that you think men need to ask themselves about their current state of friendship? So, what if I'm doing a bit of analysis on my own life? How do I
Yeah,
know if I've got good guys? Like what should I be looking at? How should I be analyzing myself? What kind of questions should I be asking about me as it relates to this topic?
there's a Hal Moore who was commander of the 1st Battalion, 7th U.S. Cavalry. If you ever seen We Were Soldiers, uh, Mel Gibson plays him, and I'm family friends with all the people that fought in that battle, and he had some great lines. And Hal Moore had the ability um, to stop in the middle of a battle, like literally stop in the middle of a hot landing zone. Bullets are zipping all over the place. Artillery's going off behind him. And he would stop long enough to ask himself two questions. The first one is what am I doing right now that I shouldn't be doing? And the second one is uh, what am I not doing that I should be doing? Um, and it was basically taking an analysis of the situation. And why that applies is one day, I always hit social media. Like I get up in the morning, my phone goes to the bathroom. Anybody else? And instead of hitting the Bible app or going to my quiet time or going to prayer, I always end up like my default is scrolling to Instagram or whatever. And I ask myself those two questions. What am I doing right now that I shouldn't? And what should I be doing instead, basically? And I realized, man, I need to get off of social media. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do is we need to fly up to 36,000 feet and take a really good look at our lives and say, okay, is there anything right now that if I was able to just drop it all on the front page of the newspaper or post it on my wife's Instagram, is there anything that would be really embarrassing or really upsetting to my wife or a career killer if they saw through the veil, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is yes, the follow-on question is, what am I going to do about that? Because oftentimes it's not a what am I going to do, it's a who am I going to do this with? And you ask yourself, do I have somebody I can pick up the phone and call at 3 o'clock in the morning to tell them that this is I'm completely off the rails? If the answer is no, then you have your answer.
Yeah.
But it takes some really difficult introspection. And then on top of that, I challenge men to do this all the time. Sit down with your wife on the couch, one-on-one, no kids, no TV, phones in your pockets, and ask her one question. Is there anything that I've done this week or said this week where I've hurt your feelings? And typically you can expect to reap the whirlwind when you ask a question like that. And then I would challenge everybody to do the same thing with each one of their kids, so that we're not potentially creating a wound, a father wound that could outlive us. We're being proactive about that. And if you get answers that you don't like, then you have your answer. I need somebody else in my life. And you can be pretty confident in your own strength, but if you ask the other people you cohabitate with under the same roof, am I okay? And you get a no, then you'll know that, I really need some brotherhood in my life. I had a pastor tell me a couple of weeks ago that in his 7th year of ministry, he went home and his wife looked at him and says, I hate the man you've become.
Mm.
And those are the kind of conversations that will drive men into accountability.
Yeah.
And then when you finally reach that point, you don't have to be good. You just have to be there. You don't have to dazzle them with your biblical brilliance, and be real with them, because your transparency will give them permission in turn to be transparent. And then just enjoy the ride, see where God takes it.
Yeah. Yeah. And in there, when you were talking about getting the answers you don't like, that is so important. And sometimes men are afraid of that until they get used to the cycle of that feedback.
Yeah.
I've written stuff, you've written stuff. If you were writing a book, you're working on a new book, and you give some chapters to people for feedback, and you say, okay, what do you think? Give me your feedback. And they said, yeah, it's okay. That is so useless.
Yeah.
As information. We actually need it.
Yeah.
So we should start to crave those things, because that's how we get better. That's how we improve.
Oh,
is when
man.
we get
And I'll
those
tell
answers.
you, when David told me you have to let your son go, that was completely not the answer I was expecting.
Yeah.
I went to his house to get my backup, man. We were going to fight this thing.
Get validated.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and amazingly enough, most of the time, more often than not, the things that I get from accountability and my brother or my group, um, I hear things that number one, I don't want to hear, but number two, I needed to hear.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the throes of an emotional compromise, you're not going to make a rational decision.
Yeah.
That's what the other guys are for.
Yeah. Cause we all have blind spots.
Oh,
And we all know blind spots when we're
yep.
driving. We know and we understand blind spots, but for some reason we think we don't have them in our lives, in our interpersonal relationships, in the way we connect with our wives and connect with our kids. We're like, no, I see everything that's happening there. It's just when
Yeah.
I'm driving, I've got blind spots. But if you have to, like you said, to give the person permission to point out your blind spots and like, dude, this isn't your blind spot. You are about to go
And
off
you,
the road.
you can't get mad at them because you're the one that gave them permission in the first place. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the beauty of all of it is, you know, ask anybody to put together the top 10 most influential people in their lives. And one of the people on that list is going to be a coach, football, whatever sport you played. But if you think back to actually doing daily triples during the beginning of football season before the first game in August heat, you hated that guy,
Yeah.
but you became better because of that guy. And
Right.
that's almost in some cases a way to look at certain stages of accountability is like, I want to choke the life out of this guy, but he's not wrong.
Yeah. But
And
he's not wrong. That's a great way
uh,
to phrase it. Yeah.
I'll, I'll be better.
Yeah.
I'll be in better shape spiritually when this is all said and done.
Yeah.
And that's really
Yeah.
the end game.
It is. Right. That's what it is. We're on this journey where we're trying to become the guy Jesus told us to be.
Yep. It's a
And
process.
that's what we're after. Yep.
Yeah.
And we never hit that point. We say, yep, now I'm there. It's a lifelong journey. Yeah. Hey, what's one last point you'd love to leave guys with? You could either kind of go back to something we were talking about that you wanted to reinforce or something different, just something to leave guys with in this conversation about isolation, being alone, friendship, that sort of thing. What would you like to leave guys with?
Well, I always try to put things into a context of, we are we are on a spiritual deployment. Jesus even prayed for his disciples. So my prayer is not that you take them out of the world, that you protect them from the evil one. And then he said, they are not of the world, even as I am not of it. We have to remember, guys, that every morning when we get up, we are at a forward operating base. This is not our home. Heaven's our home. When we made a profession of faith in Jesus, we surrendered our birth certificate here on earth and we became eternal citizens of heaven, which means that every morning when we get up, we walk outside the wire of the front door of our house. There is an enemy out there that has a single mission. And the enemy of our souls has now figured out the easiest way to ruin a family is to go after the man. And so you'll notice that more often than not, the man is the target. And there's a wide net of things thrown out there, whether it's workaholism or success or pornography or you name it. The net is thrown for men because the enemy's figured out if he can take me out of the equation, he can ruin my marriage, the kids, and the generations that come after me with a single shot. And that's just smart combat. You don't walk outside the front door without covering fire, overwatch, body armor, and a weapon. So I would challenge you to take everything a day at a time. And since we only have a guarantee maybe of the rest of today, or we don't even have that, but every day is a gift. We don't know when the Lord's going to bring us home. Don't try to, swallow the whole frog. Just take a small task at a time and get up tomorrow morning and say, number one, I am going to seek God's help in being the best man that I can be. Maybe every time you open your mouth, you end up in a fight with your wife. Pray, hey, you know what? Today, God, Holy Spirit, give me the strength to make it through just today. All I want is one day of not having an argument. I just want to have one day of getting along with my teenage daughter. I want to have one day of getting along with my boss and share that with somebody so that they can call you up or send you a text, say, how'd it go today? And then you're on your way to
Yeah, that's
brotherhood.
excellent. That is excellent. That's perfect way to wrap up. So if guys want to find out a little bit more about you, about your organization, where do they go? Where do they go to find out?
Well, the hub is always the website, which is roughcutmen.org.
Excellent.
RUGHCUTMEN.org. We're on socials everywhere: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. If you're on socials, you'll find us. Uh, but you can get to all of those through the website. My contact information, different event formats, books, the video series that we have set up as well, which is a great launch vehicle for small groups. And it's like nothing that's ever been done before. You just have to see it to believe it. So that's on the website as well,
Excellent.
roughcutmen.org.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll make sure to include that in the notes
Cool.
as well. So, hey, I really appreciate your time today. It was a great conversation. I hope guys got a lot out of this, and have a great rest of your day.
Hey, you too, brother. God bless you, man.